I wanted to look at two separate studies that have been done on the subject of rent control. Because it's one thing to talk with people and get their hot take of emotional reaction, but it's another thing to actually look at the scientific literature and what some economists or other experts have found when they actually dig deeper and look into the data all about rent control. So the first study I want to look at is one that was done looking at Cambridge, Massachusetts. So what happened in Cambridge was from December 1970 all the way through to 1994, Cambridge, Massachusetts introduced rent control. Now, we'll be going into the variations of rent control later on with Christian, but basically what Cambridge did was all rental units built before 1969 in Cambridge were regulated by rent control. So basically, the amount of increase a landlord could subject their tenants to was capped. So that's basically called a capped rent increase. Now, what happened was the whole intent behind it was to provide more affordable housing. Prices go up, and we're seeing that right now with inflation. You know, the cost of living goes up, all the other ancillary costs. And what the government wanted to do, what the community wanted to do, was provide more affordable housing for some disadvantaged people, and just make sure that people were able to live in the community. And basically what happened was right before, in 1994, right before rent control ended in Cambridge, Massachusetts, rent-controlled units were typically rented at 40% below the price of nearby non-rent controlled properties. So basically what the study found is that in Cambridge, right on the eve of rent control disappearing, going away, that there was a 40% variance between rent-controlled properties and non-rent-controlled properties. That's quite staggering, and I'm really interested to get Christian's take on this. Now, newly decontrolled properties. Now, this study really looks at the impact of rent control on property values. So this is looking at it from an ownership standpoint. Newly decontrolled properties, the market values increased by 45%. So basically what we're seeing here is that rent control actually stymied or suppressed the capital growth of the asset when rent control was in place. Now, what the study really also looks at is the indirect impacts on neighboring properties and nearby communities. So basically what the study talks about is that the property values increased by about $2 billion between 1994 and 2004. So we take that decade immediately following the expiration of rent control, and property values increased by $2 billion. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Only $3 million of that $2 billion was actually accounted for by the direct effect of decontrol on those controlled properties. So that leaves about $1.7 billion in indirect impact. So basically what the study found is that more than half of the capitalized cost of rent control was borne by owners who never even owned rent-controlled properties anyway. And this is the indirect impact the study's looking at. So basically, we have the rent-controlled area right here. This study found that values were suppressed, but it also impacted the non-rent controlled properties on the periphery because it was holding it down as well. And that's a big cost in terms of property values and everything that goes into that. So basically, to summarize, the policy imposed about $2 billion in cost to local property owners, but only $3 million of that was really passed on to the tenants. So basically, in this study, they found that property owners surrounding rent control, they were impacted and they actually lost in terms of value. And when rent control was lifted, property values increased, and this study cited 45%. So that's Cambridge, Massachusetts. I found that very interesting. Now we have to go to the other side of the country and look at San Francisco. Now, San Francisco, especially like California, everybody has various opinions on policy in place there. Some people are fans of it. Other people are not so keen on it. But basically what San Francisco did was in 1979, they imposed rent control on all standing buildings with 5 or more apartments. So if you had a duplex, triplex, you were okay. But at the time, anything with 5 or more units fell under the rent control umbrella. And what they did was they regulated rent increases. They linked it to the consumer price index and within a tenancy. But basically, once the tenant moved out, the new tenant, they could be charged then market rent. That's very different from some other areas where the unit is rent controlled no matter what happens. So what they did initially was they exempted new construction from rent control, because the thinking was, well, we don't want to prohibit or add another layer of complexity to people developing more units, because we want that supply coming into the market. So new construction was exempt. And also smaller multifamily buildings were exempt because they didn't want to impact the mom and pop landlord who maybe owned a couple properties and they were going to use them for their retirement. But this exemption was lifted in 1994. And so basically, let's take a look. So from the initial 1979 rent control law, that law was only impacting properties from 1979 and earlier, but they also removed the small multifamily exemption, and then basically they added another layer to it. So it was basically any property built before 1980, and things got a little bit complicated. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole just yet. So what they found, this study found, was that rent control buildings were 8 percentage points more likely to convert to a condo than buildings in a controlled group they were looking at. So basically what it's saying is that, okay, a building's rent control, these owners are willing to go through the condo conversion to sell as a way of making money rather than holding on to the asset in a rent controlled environment. So what that is really going to do is that's going to decrease the stock of available rental units if you have more condo conversions happening because of rent control. And rent control, this study found, led to a 15% decline in the number of renters living in treated buildings and a 25% point reduction in the number of renters living in rent-controlled units. And this is all relative to 1994 levels. So basically, rent control was put in place to provide affordable housing. The government was concerned about emigration from the marketplace, displacing the current population through gentrification. But it actually found, the study is saying that actually led to a reduction in the number of people living in rent-controlled properties, because there were less rent-controlled properties because people were busy taking another route, doing condo conversions. So this 15% point reduction in the rental supply of smaller multifamily housing, they're saying it led to rent increases because you have less supply, you have equal demand, and that's going to force the price up. So instead of keeping prices at a low level, keeping it affordable, what this policy did, according to the study, was it had owners take a look at other ways of making money, which was condo conversion. The rental control stock was really limited, and that eventually led to limited stock. Demand stays the same, so price has to go up. So it basically had the exact opposite impact that they were looking for. So, and then the study further goes on to talk about, since many of the existing rental properties, what I just spoke about, were converted to higher end owner-occupied condos, the passage of rent control ultimately led to a housing stock crisis, and also that that stock was catering to higher income individuals rather than the lower income portion of the renter population. So basically, we saw a shift in terms of the makeup, the demographic of what owners were going for, and a lot of that rental stock was targeting higher income families rather than the affordable rental range. Now, this study again goes on to say that it appears that rent control has actually contributed to the gentrification of San Francisco rather than the exact opposite, which was the policy's original goal. So it also found, though, that in the short term, rent control appears to help affordability, but then in the long run, it actually decreases affordability, fuels gentrification, and also has an impact on the surrounding community. So those are two studies that I found very, very interesting. I'm always interested to look at the numbers and what other people are saying in the space, and I find these two studies remove the emotional component that often gets thrown into this conversation. Whenever we can remove emotions, we always end up making better decisions. Hey, thanks for watching. I've got 2 other great clips for you to watch right over here, and let me know what you think. Leave a comment, hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And until next time, happy investing.